All right, everyone, coaching video on measures and instruments. So this section is still kind of in the front end of chapter 4. The section that's before it was participants, and you're going right into measures and instruments. I'm just going to dive in. Measures and instruments should be a level 1 heading. It means it's bold, it's centered, and that means that all of the subsections in this section should be level 2 headings. Maybe there might be some level 3, but I doubt it. There's probably mostly just some level 2 headings. Purpose of this section: provide readers with a comprehensive understanding of how you collected data throughout your PDSA cycle implementation. This is where you talk about all your instruments. So did you interview? Did you survey? Did you collect other data? Did you collect like attendance data? Did you collect achievement data? Did you collect employee retention data? Like how did you, what is the data that you collected? And what is the data that you collected? And how did you collect it? Maybe I should say what are the data you collected and how did you collect it? It also establishes the credibility of your measurement approach and helps readers evaluate the validity and reliability of your findings by detailing what you measured, how you measured it, and why these measurement choices aligned with your change idea. Okay, so the length of this section is probably going to be about 2 to 4 pages, likely minimum of 2, but it could potentially be a little bit more than 4, all depending on how many instruments, how many measures you might have included, and your summary table might also be a little long, or it's okay if that makes it bleed over into 5 pages. We don't have to be super rigid here. I'm just giving you an example. Content overview, you're describing your data collection instruments. So here we're talking about the instrument is the thing you use to collect what you are measuring, right? So if I'm really measuring participants' perspectives, I'm going to use the instrument of an interview to measure participants' perspectives, right? Explain your measurement timeline, justify your instrument selection, and present a summary table of all measures used throughout your PDSA cycle. Tone, you're using past tense because you, again, have done this. You're describing what you actually used. Or, you might still be in your do phase. You might be still actually using them, but we're still writing this section up as if it's past tense. And here, this section is going to have this tone of methodological precision while remaining accessible. What I mean by that, methods and methodology. Methods are the ways in which we collect data, which is like interview, survey, participant observation, questionnaire. Methodology is like how we go about designing that, like how we put all of those together to create this data collection process, to create our do phase essentially, right? So you'll have this kind of methodological tone to it, which is, this is probably the section that reads a little bit more scholarly, maybe than other sections, just because we're trying to talk about these measures and instruments in this scholarly way. But gentle reminder that we as scholar practitioners will also talk about it in an accessible way. Have you ever read an empirical research article where they're talking about instruments or their data collection methods and you don't understand what they're saying because it just sounds like researcher jargon? Yeah, that's probably not accessible writing. So here we want the way in which you speak about these things to be accessible. First person narrative, and demonstrate thoughtful alignment between measures and your problem of practice. So you're also trying to communicate to your readers, to your audience, that you understand the connection between your measure, your instrument, and your problem of practice. You're communicating to the people who are reading that what you're doing and you're understanding you made these decisions wisely and carefully. So here's some organization strategy and some guiding questions. Use these guiding questions to synthesize your measurement approach. These guiding questions are here to make sure that you cover details, avoid writing in a call and response manner, right? You are not a robot. These are not just questions that you just tick off and you don't come back and artfully craft them into paragraphs, okay? Now, again, reminder that this is a level 1 heading, measures and instruments. So before you have a level 2 heading, what do you have to include? APA wants you to include some stuff, right? So here we'll have a brief introduction, right? A brief introduction paragraph that provides an overview or roadmap of this section. Do not write this section till last. Make sure you, that way you put all your details way down here in these subsections and you provide like a brief little roadmap before your level 2 headings. So your first level 2 heading is measurement, framework, and rationale. This is where you might find that if this is a little different than maybe if you've read other dissertations, this is probably where our dissertation is going to differ. And if you read other published research articles, this is where our dissertation differs. This is how we are approaching talking about our measures and instruments here in our program at Midland and what we want to see in our dissertation. So we want to hear about your measurement framework and your rationale. So organize this subsection by type of measure. That can be really helpful. You probably want to have 1 to 2 paragraphs per measure. So take a look at the measures that you collected. Were they outcome measures? Were they driver measures? Were they process measures? And you can present them in that way. That might be a helpful way of organizing, talking about your measurement framework, right? So some of your guiding questions. What did you need to measure to determine if your change idea was working? How did your measures connect to your problem of practice and change theory? Think back to your chapter 3, your driver diagram. Why did you choose these measures? And then eventually you developed instruments to collect those measures, right? To measure the thing. But how did they relate to your problem of practice? What was your thinking there? Tell us your thinking. Tell us your rationale. What types of measures did you use? Outcome measures, driver measures, process measures. You can organize this section by type of measure, which is, I'm kind of repeating that. But essentially your measurement framework is, what did you need to measure to determine if your change idea was working? And how did they connect to your problem of practice? That's like your why. That's like your rationale. The next level 2 section is instrument selection and development. So there, earlier just talking about your measures. Here you're talking about the actual development of your instruments, where you developed your surveys, where you wrote out your interview guides, right? You can organize your paragraphs by instrument and consider using a similar flow to how you presented your measurement framework above. So if you first started talking about your outcome measures, then talk about the instruments first that were related to your outcome measures down here. So you have this kind of we understand this logical structure. Which specific instruments, surveys, or data collection tools did you use? Organize these by paragraphs. Make sure the main topic sentence clearly tells, if you want to talk about all the interviews that you did, the interview methods that you use, then your main topic sentence should be clearly suggesting to me, if I'm skimming through your paper, that, oh, that paragraph is all about interviews. Or that paragraph is about interviews with students. Oh, that paragraph is about interviews with teachers. Oh, that paragraph is about interviews with parents, right? So which specific instrument, surveys, or data collections tools did you use? Did you use existing validated instruments or create your own measures? So in discussing that, again, these are guided questions, not just call and response. Some of you might have looked at other instruments and used it exactly, or you might have taken a questionnaire and just used a portion of it, you modified it. Maybe your district or your organization already has this tool and you're just using it as part of this project, right? It's not something that you created necessarily, but it's something that your organization uses. How did you adapt or modify instruments for your specific context? So in discussing each instrument, talk about how you might have adapted or modified it. What piloting or validation steps did you take with your instruments? Some of you might have piloted them. You might have taken your instrument back to your stakeholders discussion people and said, this is what we plan to use. Or maybe you created it together, right? Talk about that as you're talking about your instrument selection and development. Give 1 to 2 sample elements in the narrative of your description. So if you're talking about, you created an interview guide that had these different categories of topics, just give us a sample. Give us 1 or 2 interview questions, not the whole thing. You will include in your appendix, your actual interview guide, but in the narrative of your work, include for example, I asked these 2 questions, something that gives your audience, your readers, a taste of what was in your interview guide, what was in your survey, what was a snippet of that instrument, so that we can see it, we can get a sense of what it is without having to flip all the way to your appendix and actually see the entirety of the thing. This could even include screenshots. These could include visuals, depending on whatever type of instrument that you use. But give some little example. Again, you're trying to paint the picture. You're trying to communicate to your readers and your audience. I think I just tried to combine those 2 words. What some of your instruments were. This will help your audience get a sense of your instrument, and then we'll talk about, we'll turn to your appendix for your entire item. For each instrument, include a copy of the instrument in your appendix as much as possible, right? You might be working with an instrument where it's impossible to put it in your appendix. I'm thinking of organizations that might have this online tool where it's like, not possible. In that way, you might just have like the landing page or a screenshot of the website or some element of it. But, if it's impossible to include it, then that's okay. But some of you created surveys. Some of you created interview guides. You will want to include those in your appendix. Now, your appendix you're going to have many of them. APA 7th style has particular ideas or requirements about how to organize your appendices. They are going to be labeled alphabetically in order: Appendix A, Appendix B, Appendix C, and so on. The first one in your appendices should be Appendix A. It's centered, or that title, Appendix A, is centered. It's not bolded, or it is bolded. Yeah, center and bold the title of your appendix. And then on a new page, you'll have Appendix B, and then you'll have Appendix C, and they should be named alphabetically, A, B, C, D, and that is how they should be presented in your body of your work. So the very first one that you present here in Chapter 4, label that first one Appendix A, and that's what goes as Appendix A. And then as you keep writing and writing and writing your narrative and you talk about your next instrument, see Appendix B. That one goes in Appendix B. You don't want to go out of order. You don't want to the very first thing in your narrative is tell us about Appendix E. And we haven't even been introduced to what Appendix A, B, C, and D are, right? So alphabetical, they have to go in order. Again, you might choose to label these just Appendix X, and they're all Appendix X until you get them in the right order, and then you go back and label the first one A, the second one B, the third one C, etc. These sections in your APA manual have more details about your appendices, so take a look at those sections: 2.14, 2.17, 2.24. And similar to your participant section, you'll have a measures and instruments summary table. So you'll present this table. Will be 4-point something with your measures, measure types, instruments with their the labeled appendix that it's in, the data collection method, and the rationale or purpose. And you will present this table in the instrument selection and development subsection. You can place it before or after you discuss each instrument. If you place it before, you still need to have a narrative like, here's a summary of these, and I go into detail next about each individual instrument. Or you can have the narrative, paragraph narrative of each instrument, and then conclude with, and here is a summary of these instruments in table 4 point whatever, okay? Now, before I have a sample table to give you, a template. So an actual template with examples of what we want to see in your dissertation. Before I get to those, detail level. Specific information about each instrument includes purpose, format, timing, and alignment with your change idea. This is huge. Include enough detail that another practitioner could understand and potentially replicate your measurement approach. Like, that's how much detail you want to give here. That's that methodological tone with accessibility. Including your actual, guide or survey in your appendix is helpful. But avoid overwhelming technical details, but ensure methodological transparency. Your chair will help you know if you're getting too detailed, okay? Writing tips. Clearly connect each measure to your problem of practice, like that's part of your rationale. Explain any modifications. Be transparent. Use precise language when describing data types and collection procedures. Introduce your summary table with a clear narrative. Table shall follow APA. Remember that strong measurement builds credibility for your entire implementation. If you are vague in this section, or you are unclear in this section, your audience, your dissertation committee are probably going to be a little hesitant about believing you and, determining whether or not your findings are credible, or even whether your findings are valid. So it's a really important section. Now, here's your sample measures and instrument summary table, and there are different columns. Here are the list of the columns that you see, and their definitions. So you have a what I measured column, a type of measure column, the instrument, and in parentheses, the appendix that it's in, data collection method, and rationale or purpose. So those are the column definitions. Here is take a look at those, but here's your template. This is what you can just copy and paste. You can legit take that, copy and paste it. You are likely going to need to add some rows, and you'll need to change it to times New Roman 12, but you can keep it single spaced, okay? So there's your template. What I measure, specific construct or variable, type of measure, is it an outcome measure, a driver measure, a process measure, the instrument and the appendix, so the name of the instrument. Student interview, and in parentheses you might have Appendix A. Data collection method, how you collected this, it was like with 10 participants over time, maybe they were 30 minutes each, weekly 30 minutes, that kind of thing. And rationale, why this instrument aligned with your measurement need. If you have a note, include it there. So here's some examples. Measures in the instrument table. Example number 1, we've got what I measured: student satisfaction with online learning experience. It was an outcome measure, and we used the student satisfaction survey, which can be found as Appendix C. Maybe there are other things in this body of work that are in Appendix A and in Appendix B. So here the first one is going to be C. There's a note here that was adapted from the course experience questionnaire, meaning that maybe in this organization they already had something like this and it's just adapted from that. Data collection method, anonymous online survey administered pre and post implementation. Rationale, I captured end goal of improved student experience and learning satisfaction as primary outcome of engagement intervention. Like this is what we're trying to change. We're trying to change student satisfaction, right? Now, there might have been student perceptions of teacher-student connection. It was a driver measure, semi-structured empathy interview protocol, located in Appendix D. Individual virtual interviews, 20 minutes each, explored key drivers of engagement, such as students' sense of connection in relationship with instructor, which theory suggests drive satisfaction. There's probably connection to that back in Chapter 2, or as part of their driver diagram. And then here's an example of a process measure. Frequency of interactive teaching strategies used. Maybe adjust the sense as I go there. I think it's Appendix E. Classroom observation checklist is what it was called. Weekly self-observation logs completed by instructor. And there's the rationale. Okay. Here's, and it keeps going with a sample driver measure, another sample process measure. So in that example, I have a note here that it is fictitious, but it's just giving you a sense of what you need to include in your measures and instruments. And here, if we just look at this table alone, we should get a summary of, a synthesis of your measurement framework and your instrument selection and development, right? This is kind of pulling all of those big ideas together. Now, what I want you to be careful here, the instrument title that you give it right here, make sure it's that same title in your appendix. So whatever you're calling it, make sure that you are consistent with how you are referring to that instrument throughout. So if it's called Student Satisfaction Survey, make sure that you're always calling it Student Satisfaction Survey. You don't have some places where you just call it Student Survey. You need to have consistency there, okay? And then take a note of what is included in the data collection method. This is kind of like the process or the procedures, a summary of that. And then your rationale and purpose. Notice that these rationales are pretty brief, okay? They are not paragraphs long. They're really just like one statement, okay? Like one statement, one sentence. Try to keep it like that. Don't belabor the point. We want it short and sweet. We want to be able to skim this. Now, you might want to talk about the data collection methods in depth here. We haven't even gotten to your do phase. When you get to your do phase section of this whole chapter, you're going to say in detail the narrative storytelling of actually implementing these instruments and measures and what those interviews were like and how long, you'll give all the details there. Here, you're mostly just giving the summary of your procedures, right? So think of it as a summary of your procedures, of how you engaged, how you use these instruments to measure what it was that you were wanting to measure. Okay, good luck writing this section. And having an appendix at the end, right now at the end of Chapter 4 is fine. We will eventually put that appendix at the very, very end of your dissertation, right? So it'll be at the end. But right now you can just include that appendix here in this document.